You're 31 years old, and you've been sitting on a secret that could get you killed 17 different ways. Your phone has 2 SIM cards. Your apartment has 3 different locks on the door. And the burner phone in your sock drawer hasn't rung in 4 days, which means either your FBI handler is giving you space or something has gone very wrong. You don't know which one. You're trying not to think about it. You pull the hood of your dark gray sweatshirt up and stare at the ceiling at 2 o'clock in the morning, running the same numbers over and over again. How did you get here? That's the question, isn't it? The answer is embarrassingly simple. You didn't choose this. It chose you. 3 years ago, you were a courier. Not the kind with a bicycle and a company logo. The other kind. The kind that picks up envelopes from the back of a dry cleaner on Tuesday and drops them at a restaurant in Carroll Gardens by Thursday. Nobody asked your name at first. Nobody explained what was in the envelopes. You were 19. You needed rent money. Your cousin knew a guy. That's all it took. 19 years old, short black hair, wearing the same blue jeans and gray hoodie you wear now, because some things don't change even when everything else does. The man who recruited you was called Sal, not his real name. Everyone used not their real name. Sal was the kind of person who smiled constantly, which should have been a warning. He explained the job in about 30 seconds. Pick up, drop off, don't open anything, don't be late. Then he slid $300 across the table in cash. For one trip. You did the math. 1 trip a week. That was more than $1,200 a month. Under the table, 0 paperwork, 0 taxes. You said yes before he finished talking. For the first year, nothing happened. You moved envelopes, collected your cash, kept your mouth shut. You told yourself it was probably gambling money, loan paperwork, some gray area that didn't technically hurt anyone. Victimless. The kind of arrangement where the system was already broken enough that you were practically doing a service. You kept your opinions to yourself and convinced yourself that not knowing the details was the same as not being responsible for them. That belief lasted exactly 13 months. Then Sal started introducing you to the crew. Not formally. You just began getting invited to things. A birthday dinner in the back room of a restaurant. A poker night in a warehouse with no visible address. You weren't just a courier anymore. You were adjacent to something much larger. And once you're adjacent to it, the gravity starts pulling. Sal moved you to bigger pickups. Cash instead of envelopes. Packages instead of cash. You didn't ask what was in them. You already knew. The first time you saw real violence was at one of those poker games. A guy named Terrence owed money to someone important and showed up without it. Nothing cinematic happened. No drawn-out speech. Someone walked over, hit him twice, and the conversation moved on like a light switch flipped. You sat there in your jeans and hoodie with your heart halfway up your throat, staring at your cards, pretending you hadn't seen a thing. That was the first moment you understood this wasn't a gray area anymore. This was the actual thing. Here's what nobody explains when you're starting out. There's no exit interview. There's no 2 weeks notice. You don't wake up one morning, decide you've had enough, and go find a different situation. By the time you fully understand the shape of what you've joined, you're already in deep enough that leaving looks more dangerous than staying. So you stayed. You told yourself you'd figure out the exit later. Later kept not arriving. Devin Cole was the one who explained the structure. He'd been around the crew 4 years by then. Black hair going slightly gray at the temples, always in black pants and a dark navy shirt regardless of the occasion. The kind of person who looked put together without appearing to try. He had this quality of watching everything and reacting to nothing. He sat down across from you one night after a pickup that had gone sideways and slid a drink over without a word. No questions. He just sat there. That was Devin's thing. He showed up, stayed quiet, and somehow made the silence feel like a favor. He explained the hierarchy over the next few weeks in small pieces. Not a lecture. More like he'd drop a sentence here while you waited for something else. There was a boss you'd never met. Captains underneath, soldiers underneath them. And then associates, which was you. Not a made man. Not officially anything. Just close enough to be useful. And close enough that if you ever became a problem, the solution wouldn't be complicated. That word sat in your chest every time you thought about it. Problem. The FBI showed up 14 months before the story gets interesting. 2 agents in a parking garage while you were walking to your car. Standard setup. They'd followed you for 2 weeks first. They knew your route, your schedule, your cousin's name. They had the dry cleaner. They showed you photographs. Time-stamped. Detailed. They weren't asking if you were involved. They were showing you exactly how involved you already were. Then they asked what you wanted to do about it. You said nothing for a long time. They let the silence sit there. Finally, one of them, Agent Torres, who looked like she hadn't slept since the previous administration, told you precisely what you were facing. Federal charges, conspiracy, racketeering potentially. Minimum mandatory years depending on how they built the case. She slid a folder across the hood of your car and you looked at the numbers. Your stomach went somewhere below your knees. What do you want from me, you asked. Everything, she said. You didn't say yes that night. You went home and sat on the floor of your apartment in the dark and called Devin. You didn't tell him what had happened. You just said you needed to think through something and didn't want to be alone. He showed up 40 minutes later in his black pants and navy shirt with 2 beers and no questions. He sat on the floor next to you, back against the couch, and watched nothing with you for an hour. When he left, he clapped you once on the shoulder and told you to get some sleep. He had no idea you were already deciding to betray everyone in the room. Here's the thing about becoming an informant. It doesn't feel like one big decision. It feels like 100 small ones. You say yes to the FBI, then you say yes to a recording device. Then you agree to attend one specific meeting and just listen carefully. Each step has its own logic. Each step feels survivable by itself. By the time you're wearing a wire into a sit-down with Sal and 2 captains you've known for 2 years, you realize you passed the point of no return about 40 decisions back. The first piece of information you gave them was small. A pickup location. A time. A description of the guy who handled the handoff. Nothing happened right away. Nobody got arrested. Nothing visibly changed. You felt sick for 3 days and then the feeling faded, which was its own kind of terrifying. The next piece of information was bigger, and the one after that bigger still. The FBI was patient. They weren't moving fast. They were building a full picture, they told you. They needed you to keep going. After 6 months of cooperating, you knew things about the operation that most crew members never learned. You sat in on meetings you weren't supposed to be invited to. The captains had started trusting you more, which was deeply ironic given what you were doing with that trust. Sal moved you out of courier work entirely. You were in logistics now, planning, coordination. The kind of work that put your name attached to things. Good for the FBI's case. Catastrophic for your life expectancy if this ever came out. Devin noticed something had shifted. He didn't say it directly. He just started watching you differently. That calculated observational quality that had always felt neutral began to feel pointed. One evening, he fell into step beside you after a meeting and walked a full block without saying a word. Then he said quietly that you seemed distracted lately. Not an accusation, just a statement of fact. You told him you weren't sleeping well. He looked at you about a second longer than the moment required, then nodded. You knew he was the sharpest person in that crew. You were fairly certain he knew. You just couldn't tell what he planned to do with it. The thing that nearly ended everything was a situation they called the Morrison problem. Not a person this time, a shipment. Someone had skimmed from a delivery that ran through your logistics chain, and the boss wanted to know who. They were going to audit everything. Every transaction, every handoff, every person whose name touched the route. Your name was on 2 legs of that route. You hadn't skimmed anything. But the FBI had flagged a specific transaction you documented for them, which created a discrepancy that hadn't existed before you started cooperating. You called Torres at 11 at night from a payphone 3 neighborhoods away. You gave her the situation in 90 seconds. She went quiet. Then she told you what you needed to hear, which was also the last thing you wanted to hear. Sit tight. Don't draw attention to the discrepancy. If anyone asks directly, answer directly and call her immediately after. She couldn't extract you yet. They were 6 weeks from having enough. 6 weeks. You needed to stay functional for 6 more weeks. You went back to your apartment and sat on the edge of your bed in your jeans and hoodie and white sneakers like you were about to go somewhere but weren't going anywhere. 6 weeks. Might as well have been 6 years. You thought about what happened to Terrence at that poker game. You thought about your name on the logistics paperwork. You thought about Devin watching you walk down the street with that quiet measuring look. Devin knocked on your door at 8 the next morning, which was unusual. He had 2 coffees. He handed you one and came inside and sat down across from you at the kitchen table without being invited. He looked at you and said, very quietly, that he didn't want to know the details. He said he'd been around long enough to recognize someone caught between 2 bad options. He said he wasn't asking questions, but if something needed to be covered for a stretch, he could manage that. He didn't elaborate on what that meant. He just drank his coffee. You sat there trying to figure out the angle. Was he offering to help you? warning you that he'd already been covering for you, testing you. With Devin, it was never entirely clear. What was clear was that he wasn't going to the boss with suspicions. For whatever reason, he was choosing silence. You didn't ask him why. You said thank you. He nodded, set his cup on the counter, and left. You didn't see him again for 10 days. The investigation broke in late March. Not the way you expected. An arrest on a separate charge pulled in one of the captains, and that opened a thread the FBI had been waiting months to pull. Warrants went out over 72 hours, phones seized, bank records subpoenaed. Sal got picked up at his house on a Tuesday morning before breakfast. You tracked each name through updates from Torres, sitting alone in your apartment, still in your gray hoodie, watching the board clear piece by piece. They moved you to a safe house the same week. A federal building first, then a nondescript apartment 3 hours away. You sat through debriefings running 8, 9, 10 hours a day. You told them everything. The hierarchy, the operations, the meeting locations, the money flow, the names you'd heard in passing, and the names you knew well. Torres sat across from you each session with a recorder running and still took handwritten notes. She was thorough. You respected that about her. Your cooperation agreement covered the courier years. It covered the logistics work. It didn't cover a few things Torres was careful not to ask you about directly, things she'd likely categorized in a specific way and chosen not to push. Your attorney navigated most of that. You pled down to a single conspiracy count. Sentencing deferred pending the full prosecution outcome. On paper, it looked like a trade you'd made clearly and deliberately. In practice, it felt like the only exit from a burning building you'd been trapped in for 3 years. Here's where it gets into territory the FBI doesn't brief you on when they first show up with photographs and folders. The protection is real. The reduced charges are real. The new identity paperwork is real. What they don't tell you is that the life you're leaving behind is also real, and you don't stop carrying it just because your documents have a different name on them now. Your apartment, your neighborhood, your cousin who got you into this without meaning any harm by it, the people who knew your actual name and what your face looked like at 7 in the morning, gone. Devin Cole was never charged. You'd been careful about what you disclosed regarding him. His involvement was structured in a way that gave him plausible distance from the documented operations, and you'd kept his name out of the specifics wherever you honestly could. Maybe Torres made a call of her own. You never found out for certain. What you knew was that his name didn't appear in any court documents you saw later, and he walked out of the entire situation in his black pants and his navy shirt, calm and untouched, like he'd known exactly where all the exits were from the beginning. The full prosecution ran 14 months. You testified twice, a deposition first, then the actual courtroom. Both times you wore a suit that wasn't yours and sat in a chair facing people who had known you. Sal looked at you from the defendant's table for a long moment and then looked away. He never looked back. That moment took up more space in your memory than you wanted to give it. You ended up in a mid-sized city nobody would think to look for you in. New name on the lease, new license, new contact number for the single marshal managing your file. You kept your jeans, your white sneakers, your dark gray hoodie. You'd packed them in the first bag you put together before they moved you, and some things feel like the last thread of something you're not ready to cut entirely. You took a warehouse inventory job, regular hours, nothing to pick up, nothing to drop off. Nobody knew your name or what you'd done. That was the whole point. That was also the hardest part of all of it. 6 months into the relocation, a text came through on the number that only 2 people in the world had access to. No name attached, no context, just, got out clean, drink sometime. You stared at it for a long time. The number wasn't one you recognized, but the timing, the phrasing, the complete absence of anything unnecessary. That was Devin all the way. You sat with the phone in your hand in your new apartment in your new city, in the gray hoodie and the blue jeans, and thought about a guy in black pants and a dark navy shirt sitting on a floor next to you once, watching nothing, asking nothing, staying anyway.